Hey, welcome back to the Jesus Magnet podcast. I'm your host, Joel Hillary. I have my wonderful, beautiful wife, Laura, here. How you doing, Laura?
Yeah, good.
And we're joined today by an incredible man, Anton. How you doing, Anton?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Jesus Magnet. We are staying with Anton and his wonderful family in Balclutha on the road. And he has so kindly let us park up in the back of, well, the front, I suppose, of the house. And we have had dinner with him, and his daughters made us dinner. And, it's been such a blessing to be here. And, the other night when we were having dinner, Anton said, you know what, I think God is pressing me to share. I might do it. And he had the courage, and I just texted him this morning as if he was going to be sharing. Didn't even ask permission. It was like, all right, I'll meet you at 10 o'clock.
That's good.
But yeah, it was great. So thankful that you've come on to the podcast, Anton. So Anton, why don't we'll jump over to you, and you just let us know where you're from, because you're originally from South Africa.
Yep.
And you've moved over to New Zealand. How many years ago now?
25 years.
25 years.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, we've been in Balclutha for 13.
Yeah.
So started out up north and worked our way down.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow. Okay. And so how long ago were you up north, and then you moved down to Balclutha?
Yeah, so we came to New Zealand and started out in Cambridge.
Yeah.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
And then we stayed in Cambridge for about 2 years and then moved over to Auckland. And stayed in Auckland for, just before we came to Balclutha. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Had quite a good journey.
Yeah.
And just love it down south. So it's different lifestyle to Auckland. But
Yeah.
we really enjoyed our time in Auckland too, and God kind of led us to a good church, and he just took us on this journey, and we're so blessed to be here.
Oh, that is so cool.
And by the way, we're also very blessed to have you guys stay.
Thank you.
It's you guys are doing an amazing job. So yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, so let's just pass over to kind of where the beginning of your testimony, or wherever you want to start your story. We'll pass over to you, and we might just jump in with some questions here and there.
Yeah, so basically, just for me, I think, just going back to my childhood, which is a wee while ago.
Yeah.
From the age of about 7, I knew something wasn't quite up in health-wise. So I had a bit of a stomach issue, and just basic things was not quite that basic for me. And fortunately, I was blessed with really, really cool parents. And my mum always believed my stories. My dad, he believed, I guess on and off. The teachers absolutely at school didn't. They thought I didn't want to go to school. And the doctors obviously had no idea what was happening, and so, they had no idea. And basically, on and off, as the years kind of went by, they tried to kind of figure out what's going on, because I didn't, my story stayed the same, and I guess, in all honesty, school wasn't my favourite thing in the world, but that really didn't have much to do with it. So by the time I was about 14, 15, I would regularly go and see a specialist in the town quite far away. And I guess in some way, from a doctor's perspective, I guess they thought, I was trying to kind of get out of school or whatever.
Right.
And so I was sent to do all these tests, and some of them, I think the idea was to try and scare me away from, this thing this idea that I have about being sick. All that to say, when I was about 16, I had to go in for some minor surgery, and while I was under general anaesthetic, they went and did some exploratory work, and then a few days later, the doctor came to my house, and I remember this day really well. He came into my bedroom, and I was actually lying in bed, and he came and he sat on my bed, and he said he wanted to have a chat to me, and he said to me, they finally found out what was wrong with me, and he was quite happy about that part of it.
Yeah.
And then the next part of it was where he kind of started telling me what was wrong, and he said, they've now discovered that I have a particular condition, and they really don't know much about it. And also what they were basically saying was what they saw in me was pretty much the worst they've ever seen.
Wow.
And it was, Crohn's disease, which today they know a bit more about. Those days they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically had a form with him, and he said, this form he would like me to please consider donating my body to science, because, they don't know much about this condition, and once I die, they really want to, kind of use my body to try and find out more.
Wow. Was he insinuating that you might die soon?
Well,
or?
that was my next question.
Yeah.
How old were you at the time?
16.
You're 16.
So while everybody else was trying to kind of, find their identity and be cool at school and do this and that, I had this thing that I had to deal with. And I guess for me, I said to him, so, what does this mean?
Yeah.
I said, let's be straight up. How long have I got in this equation? And so he basically said, he said, they don't really know. He said, but it could be anything from 2 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
And they just didn't know. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll hopefully go for the 2 years
Yeah.
and see how that kind of gets on. And at that stage, I had a little 50cc motorbike that I used to go to school with, and this day I can remember I went into like the bush, like this. There was a little mountain thingy, and I parked my bike up the top, and I had a real conversation with God, and I used to go to Sunday school, and you do all that, and I knew about God, but I never really, up to that stage, to be honest, as I said, I had a really good childhood, and I never really needed God as such, and that day I had a conversation with him, and I said to him, listen, is this really it? I mean, is this all there is? I feel like I've not really done what I came to do, and I just prayed and had a conversation, and I said, like, if I'm going to go, I don't mind dying. I just don't like the suffering part that might go with it. So I just said, please, if I have to go, take me. But, try and, I was kind of telling God what to do.
Yeah.
I said, just try and make it easy on me. And so, and I guess, my whole life we've been working with horses and, breeding race horses and all kinds of things. And at that stage, it's an interesting thing when you think you're going to die. Suddenly, a lot of things
at that age as well,
especially at that age.
I understand being content with it potentially. Maybe at like 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah,
just because you might not kind of have the same hormones or ambitions of like getting married and all that. But at 16, you would be thinking about potentially, I am going to have a wife one day and kids and seeing the future for what it is.
Yeah.
And being told that at 16, that you got between 2 months and 2 years, that is amazing how you're able to remain content. So you had a faith quite strong at 16?
Yeah,
And
you
did
know,
that
like
strengthen with this news, or
well, definitely.
Yeah, wow.
You know, I think I never doubted that there was a God, and I never doubted that He was powerful.
yeah,
He's just never really been a part of, you know, my life to the extent where my life would depend on it.
Yeah.
And so at that stage, I basically, you know, thought, well, if I'm going to die, you know, then I can stop being afraid. And so, you know, the horses that I was riding became a bit wilder, and the things I was doing was just, you know, like just, I guess, sometimes a bit reckless.
Yeah.
I think, you know, in some way, in later years, even when I was about 18, I think, you know, I didn't really. One of the things that actually weighed quite heavily on me was I didn't want to put my parents through this. You know, I knew if this is my journey, this is my journey.
Yeah.
But I just didn't want to put my parents through it. And I thought, you know, with the whole thing with horses, you know, if somebody made a statement and they said, "Don't get on that horse, it would kill you," that was like my major motivation. I thought, what a way to go, you know. I'd much rather go this way than, and so,
yeah,
so I guess, you know, I kind of walked that journey, and then I just got to a stage where, you know, 2 years were up and I was still alive, and I thought, well, you know, I really need to get on with my life, and so, as I mentioned, I really loved this whole horse thing. So I went and studied equine science, and that's where I met my wife. So suddenly the incentive to stay alive became a lot bigger.
Yeah.
You know, at that time we were just dating. But I just kept on doing my thing. Every time I'd go to the doctors, they would tell me that I'm very sick and I'm on the way out. So I probably did something that, not that I would recommend this for anybody else, but I just thought, you know, if every time I go to the doctor they give me this bad news, you know, I stopped going to the doctor.
Yeah.
And so, I just continued with life, and, you know, had strong faith and believed in God, and just said to God, you know, I'm here and I'm doing what I'm going to do. One of the things that helped me an awful lot was, you know, once I realized that this thing is with me for life, and, you know, I prayed for it and believed that God would take it away, and He's certainly helped me make it an awful lot better. But one of the things that kind of helped me a lot was just to reset my thinking. So when I wake up in the morning and my stomach is really hurts, that to me would have been really discouraging, and it would really kind of make me think, you know, so is this the day? Where I kind of made a bit of a shift, and I woke up in the morning and my stomach didn't feel well, and I kind of got to the point where I said, this is normal. So rather than seeing that as, you know, I'm dying, I saw this as, you know, it's a great day, it's another day I'm alive, I'm here, you know, I've got a lot to be grateful for.
Yeah.
sounds a bit like when Paul had the thorn in his flesh a little bit.
Yeah.
And he prayed to God, and he said, you know, he'd been praying and praying, saying, Lord, remove this pain or this thorn in my flesh from me. And Jesus responds, he says, you know, my grace is sufficient.
Yeah.
You know, you'll live with this.
Exactly.
This will strengthen you pretty much.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think often, you know, like I've seen God perform many, many miracles, and often I think about that, and I think about perhaps, you know, the biggest miracle of all is salvation. And sometimes people think, you know, unless they see being cured of something, or, you know, a problem just dissolving, they think they may not have received their miracle. But for me, the miracle was really salvation. And so I knew if I was going to die, I knew where I was going.
Yeah.
And that was, something that I've really not doubted from the word go. However, the journey was challenging, and I was faced with this thing that I just had to kind of work with and deal with. And
there's a great saying that seems to align with your mindset.
Yeah.
Is sometimes God, might take the sickness from the person.
Yeah.
And other times He takes the person from the sickness.
Yeah.
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 Both times the person's healed.
Yeah. Exactly.
And you had adopted that mentality that whether God takes me tomorrow or today, I'll be healed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or whether He heals me today or tomorrow, I'll be healed.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And anyhow, so God led us to New Zealand, and we were managing large thoroughbred stud farms and working with again crazy horses along the way, and then started a family. And about 16 years ago, I really, really, really felt unwell and ended up in hospital, and really had, I just basically got there the evening, and within a few hours they had me in for emergency surgery. And again, I was lying in the little trolley bed before going into surgery, and again, I had that moment with God, and I said, if this is it, I'm ready. But again, I've got a 2 or 3 year old daughter at the time, and I said, love to be around for them, or for her in any case, and so I went in for surgery, and then came out and was still there, which was a bit of a bonus. And it basically turned out that on that day for that surgery, they actually had a guest lecturer in from India, and this guy specialized in abdominal surgery.
Oh, wow.
And so as I was busy recovering, one of the nurses came to me and she said to me, you're a really lucky person that this person was here to actually perform the surgery. And
wow.
So he ended up removing about a metre and a half of my small intestine, and there was all kinds of other things that they were dealing with at the time. But anyhow, and I guess I ended up in hospital quite unwell, and I had tubes coming from everywhere and whatever, and Pastor Dean, I know you guys know him too.
Pastor Dean Payne.
Yeah. Pastor Dean Payne at the time, he came to visit me one day, and he came in the door, and he's quite an expressionate type of a guy.
Yeah.
And I could just look at his face, and I could see he looked at me, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, this isn't looking very good,"
Wow.
And we had a bit of a chat, and he prayed for me that day, and the next day he was preaching in church, and when he looked up, I was sitting there in church. And he was like, "Oh my goodness, I just saw you yesterday." And he had that surprise in his face again, and like after he prayed for me that morning, the doctors came in the afternoon, they said, "You can go home." I thought, well, if I can go home, I can go to church, you know.
Awesome.
And then I was referred to a specialist, and the specialist said to me that, he put me on medication, said to me, "You're lucky to be alive. Again, future looks really bleak. If you've had this type of operation, within 5 years, between 80 and 90% of people will have a second surgery. And from there on, your quality of life is just about, not very good." And so I was on medication that I had to take for life and all that type of thing. And so he was doing this whole thing. And anyhow, I went away, and I was on the medication for a couple of weeks, and it just really didn't make me feel well. And so I stopped. And a year later, I had to see this guy again. Went in, saw him, told him I stopped the medication, and this, that, and the next. he was quite unhappy and told me he never wanted to see me again. And I said, well, as it turns out, I never want to see you again too. and it's been 19 years now.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
And
So throughout that whole timeline
yeah,
of feeling, you got all this pain in your stomach, going to doctors, going to hospitals, having the surgery. What happened? What happened to your relationship with Christ throughout that? Did it create a dependency?
well, one of the things, as I said, like being a young kid, my very first Bible was one of those illustrated Bibles that they do for the kiddies. I still remember it had this big red cover, and in it had a photo of my favourite thing was David and Goliath, seeing this little boy facing this huge giant. And for me, I guess, I also had a giant that I had to face, and I had to face it in a way that I guess didn't depend on what the doctor said. And I'm thinking about somebody like King Saul and his army, and they all said, there's this huge giant out there, and their opinion was that he was too big to fight, and then this little boy came along, and he looked at the giant and he thought, well, in his experience, this guy was too big to miss. Wow. And I think in my thing, everybody was saying to me one thing, and as I said, my mum was, throughout it all, she believed my story, and kind of my main goal was to try and be as normal as I could. I wasn't worrying about excelling at anything. I just didn't want to, and having God by my side and walking with me, again, I was just thinking about that, like that analogy of the footprints in the sand. You kind of go back and you see how God's been carrying me through these really tough situations, and I think fear can be something that is quite crippling. And I think, again, going back to this whole David and Goliath story that happened to be my favourite, I think fear crippled an entire army. And one person kind of stood up, and not by himself, but he said, I come to you in the name of the Lord who rules over all. I'm coming here as a representative. It's not just me. I'm joining up with a team, and or with a force greater than you. And so when we were in the church in Auckland, City Impact Church there, we watched the series of a guy called Reinhard Bonnke, and he had really good ways of explaining things, and he kind of said that, by yourself, the Bible talks about all people have sinned and fall short of God's glory. And basically what he said is, irrespective of your efforts and your bank account and your status and your background and history and every other thing, we're all like zeros. And he said, the Bible says that all have fallen short. And so he said, and for him, he was a zero too. And he said, but what he did, he aligned himself and he stood next to Jesus, and Jesus was the one. And suddenly he was no longer a zero, he was a 10. And he said, when people start joining him, and like I might be a zero and you might be a zero, and if I stand next to Jesus, I'm a 10, and then if you come, then it's a 100 and 1,000. And that's how it, people sometimes look at Christians and they think, it's just a small community. It's not just a small community. It's a really powerful community because, we don't rely on our own strength, but we do it,
It's a really cool way
through God.
To look at it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the footprints in the sand, so I thought it might be good for any of the listeners that might not have heard of that poem. So I just looked it up. I thought I'd just read it out. For anybody listening, it's quite powerful. It says, I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord, and across the sky flashed from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints on the sand. One belonged to me and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of my life flashed before us, I looked back at the footprints in the sand, and I noticed that many times along the path of my life there were only one set of footprints. I also happened to notice at the lowest and the saddest points of my life there was only one set of footprints. This really bothered me, and I questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way, but I have noticed that during my most troublesome times in my life, there is only one set of footprints. I don't understand why in those times when I needed you most, you should leave me. And the Lord replied, my precious child, I love you and I would never, never leave you during the times of trial and suffering. When you only saw one set of footprints, that was when I carried you. So very, very powerful poem, and it helps really put in perspective sometimes when we feel like we're alone, but it's God's really orchestrating all of those trials, all of those periods where that actually builds character and it builds endurance and builds the person that you are today. And it's really, really cool to hear from where you've come from, and it's developed almost like a steadfast faith constantly in and out of hospital. Doctors only giving you bad news all the time, and you deciding, no, I'm actually going to stop listening to that. I'm going to stop listening to anybody giving me the worst news ever. I'm going to stay with Christ, and I'm going to just press into Him. And with Pastor Dean praying for you, and the next day, I love that. They said I could leave hospital, so if I'm good enough to leave hospital, I'm good enough to go to church.
The thing is, one of the things that I've noticed and that I've seen in my walk through the years is, people often look at other people. Somebody a non-Christian might look at a Christian, and if that Christian just did a little thing outside of, a sin of sorts, they'd say, you see. That's how Christians are. And some people look at their pastors and say, no, I don't want to go to that church because that pastor, whatever, he was found speeding or whatever. And so, and I think with, looking at David and Goliath, it's about, people were looking at Goliath, and David was looking at God. And I think for us, we shouldn't really be looking at other people. We should keep our eyes on Jesus. People will always, whether they're a Christian or whatever, we're all sinners at the end of the day. And fortunately, being a Christian and having been saved and having been redeemed, it does provide us with an opportunity to go, and with the assurance, actually, not an opportunity, with the assurance of going to heaven one day. But all that to say we're not perfect. And if people rely on other people, they will be disappointed. And so I think it's very important to rely on God. And that's where I think a lot of the fear thing, even in the times we live in today, there's a lot of fear around, and people are so interested in what somebody else is saying or what somebody else is doing or whatever. And oftentimes, rather than just looking at the person in front of you, sometimes we just need to look up and know that God's got this under control. In the Bible, it talks about God has planned every single day of our lives, and it says, like in our hearts we make plans, but at the end of the day, it's not about our plans. So, thinking about that, there are things you can do or could have done or should have done or whatever. Some people, I work with a lot of different people from different walks of life, and And sometimes people say, well, I don't know that I can ever become a Christian. My life's been such a big mess in the past. And then I say, well, like your mess can be somebody else's message and their message of hope, I think God is really good at taking a situation and turning it around and using it for good. And irrespective of what may have happened in your past and so forth, I think there is always that miracle of salvation that is open to everybody. Like with that Reinhard Bonnke thing again, we're all a zero. It doesn't matter if you're in prison or if you're on the pulpit. And the only way we can actually add value to our lives is to have Jesus as part of it. And in the right place, of course.
Yeah,
in front.
so true.
So that's good.
What advice would you give to those people if they've, if they're struggling fighting their giant, sometimes it can take years and it's just a long battle. What would you say to people who might be going through something like that now?
I mean, one of the things that I've always kind of looked at is, for me, I guess, for everybody, I think, having a reasonable quality of life is I mean, we don't want to have to live in suffering all day. And it's trying to get to a place where you can say, God, we know you're on the throne and we know you've got in control, and things like pain and so forth through your body, I used to just, and still to this day, if I wake up in the night and I've got pain, I don't necessarily go and dwell on that pain. I'd say, well, now while I'm awake, I might as well pray, or I might as well speak to, and so forth. And I think just listening to your body is also important. God has given us, He's given you this body, this vehicle to journey through life with, and at the end of the day, you need to listen to that. If your body tells you, listen, this is enough, then it's enough. And if you're, and likewise, for you too, it's also about, saying, okay, right, if this is my reality, how am I going to make this work? Am I going to be, unhappy all day? Or am I going to still see, while I've got breath in my lungs, how can I be of service to others, and how can I help others, and how can I be an overcomer rather than a victim? And often
I really like that because like you're still in control regardless on your emotions. Like your emotions are indicators, not dictators. And it's like what you said earlier. Only God can turn a mess into a message. And a trial into a triumph. And I've got it here: a test into a testimony, and a victim into a victory. So it's one of those things that you're still the driver of your life. You've got these, everybody's dealt a different hand. But it's still you who chooses how you use that hand. And are you going to let that be, that your hand, is that going to dictate your emotions, your life, how you view God? Or is it going to make you press into God? Like God knows what He's doing. He designed you today exactly how you are for this day today. And a lot of the time, like there's a guy in the Bible who was blind, and Jesus healed him. And they say to him, was it his mother or his father that sinned, that caused him to be born this way, caused him to be suffering for this long? And Jesus responds, no, he was born this way to be healed, to be shown the glory of God.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that God's going to heal everyone. I believe God can heal everyone, and He knows what He's doing from a directorship standpoint. So if you're not healed right now, maybe your trial that you're going through is something that needs to be shown to somebody else, so that it gives you that ability to relate and to say, God's still good. We just live in a fallen world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, no, that's very good. And so I'm still on a journey. I've, with God by my side, I have hope for the future. I have young kids that I'm, hoping to see one day getting married and having families, and but again, it's God's timing. It's not ours, and I think.
Well, you're given 2 months.
Well,
at 16.
Exactly.
How old are you now?
50. So I have, I've, very much grateful for what I've got. And I think at a young age, sometimes people say to me, like, that's terrible or whatever. But in some way, it's given me a different perspective. It's given me the ability to really genuinely appreciate every day, and to genuinely appreciate the people around me, and to know that you are on essentially borrowed time, and that I think that has kind of like opened my eyes to in many ways, and we've been doing all kinds of initiative, giving back to the community and serving, and also just trying with the family, to raise them in a way to say, better than anybody else, and also to know that, everybody out there is facing something. We might not know what that is, and not many people know about my situation. But all that to say, God does, and He looks out for us, and I guess it's through our faith that that we end up winning these battles. And,
That's so good. Psalms 37:23 talks about the Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they may stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. And once I was young, and now I am old. That really, I believe, is your life.
Yeah.
That one scripture there is screams Anton. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that, and I think again, just going back to the whole David and Goliath thing, it talks about, the battle is the Lord's, and sometimes we feel like we want to give up because we don't have the energy to fight anymore, but the truth is we don't have to fight. It's God fights on our behalf, and God, He plans the outcome, and
Wow.
So
It's so true.
it's good.
Awesome.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you, Anton, for
thank you,
joining
guys.
us.
And,
That was incredible. It's definitely going to touch many people as they're listening to this podcast. And just so thankful that you're able to join us. And such a blessing in your life. 2 months to, how many years is that? Math. 16 to 50. Wow. That is so amazing. So thank you for listening to the Jesus Magnet podcast on the road. If you enjoyed this, make sure that you stay tuned with us, and find us on Facebook. Send us a message if you want us to drop in and say hi, as we are traveling New Zealand right now. And we'll see you next time on the Jesus Magnet podcast.